Good morning and welcome to Lurzday Thursday. I'm Rudolph Lurz and this is the weekly Lurzday Thursday podcast. Coming to you live from my basement in Spokane, Washington. So, a few notes. This podcast is designed to be entertaining and informative. And simply because I've seen enough of them to realize that I have something to offer that would be either equal to or better than a lot of the material that's out there today. So I'm glad you're here. And our first segment, highlights and salutations. First, a shout out to our advertisers. We have none. We have none because this is a brand new podcast. If you are interested, I am more than happy to give your organization a shout out and a salutation in this segment and in other segments as well. So, no advertisers. You can be assured that when you hear me give an endorsement to a product or a service or an organization, that's coming just from my own goodwill and not because I'm being paid to. Because I'm not being paid. This is just for my own entertainment or your entertainment and my own speaking into the abyss of the internet. There's a lot of weird stuff out there, and hopefully once a week this can be a positive thing for you. And enjoyable for me as well. Other highlights and salutations. Shout outs to Tyree's Travels for engaging with my first podcast last week. The first Lurzday Thursday podcast. They engaged. They actually watched it. So thank you to Tyree's Travels. And go check out his page. I did because it was nice to see some engagement on that podcast. He talks about cruises and traveling. And it's called Tyree's Travels. So shout out to Tyree's Travels and thanks for the engagement. That's what I've got for that. Other highlights from last week. We talked about a lot of different things. Namely, some benefits to good soap that I appreciate. And I gave shout outs to North Road Soap Company along with Dr. Squatch, because as I appreciate actually having nice soap. So those are two unsolicited recs from me for those two products. And I think that about covers it for highlights and salutations. Looking back, trying to think if there's anything else. I think we're good, which allows us to move to our next segment. I'm a teacher, so I keep very strict guidelines on timing of each segment to make sure I stay within the projected 45 to 60 minutes per week. So I try not to keep you more than 45 to 60 minutes, as I wouldn't keep my students more than 45 to 60 minutes. You can get a lot in that time frame. That brings us to our next segment, which is dad jokes. I got a few good ones this week. A few good dad jokes this week. I switched all the labels on my wife's spice rack. I'm not in trouble yet, but the time is coming. The time is coming. The time is coming. Oh, man. I like that one. Why are educated people so attractive? Why are educated people so attractive? Because they have more degrees. All right. I will not subject you to any further dad jokes because those are pretty bad. As a teacher, I have taught numerous subjects Well, that's a great phrase. As a teacher, I've taught numerous subjects. Yes. Redundant. My apologies. This is live because I have no editing capacity, nor do I have editing equipment. So I do this podcast in one take. I don't edit. Again, you can be sure this is the unfettered and unedited wild thoughts coming strictly from my own mind, because I do not have the technical capacity to edit or go back and change it. So we're doing it live, even though it's taped, just because that's the only way I know how to do it. Anyways, when I taught, and I still teach, I often include a quote of the day. So the quote of the day segment today comes from American philosopher and writer Ralph Waldo Emerson, who noted, "Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming I was..." Sorry, let me restart that. Ralph Waldo Emerson, "Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming I am persecuted whenever I am contradicted." Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming I am persecuted whenever I am contradicted. This is one which I wish I could just broadcast on a billboard for all my students and many others in this world who feel that whenever someone contradicts them, that they are being persecuted. It's not persecution to be contradicted. It's not persecution to be disagreed with. And that is a term that is thrown around too often these days, that every time that there's any mild conflict on social media, in general conversation and communication, that this conflict is deemed to be persecution, as in you're contradicted and you feel attacked. This is one that I selected today because it builds upon some of the things we talked about last week. Remember, last week was Sigmund Freud, "Against attacks, one can defend oneself. Against praise, one is powerless." This is the opposite. This is an overreaction. But not really the opposite. This is, again, as I said, this is building upon those principles. We got two pretty outstanding thinkers with Emerson and with Freud, that Freud recognized that praise goes right through our shields because we're used to and expecting attacks. Emerson's quote demonstrates that we feel attacked, and when oftentimes we're being contradicted. So everything feels like a personal attack because we are vain people who feel that we always have to be right. That's a tough thing to get past. I recommended putting praise through the filter of humility in response to the Freud quote last week, in response to the Emerson quote this week, to not take everything personally, and also to recognize that you might be wrong. That's a hard pill to swallow for most folks out there. This one that took me, I'm still not all the way there yet, because I'm prideful. And it is a purposeful check on that instinct to respond back with counterattacks, when in reality, it makes more sense to flesh out where the other party is coming from. If I might be wrong, is this a matter of zero sum, as in one of us is wrong and one of us is right and only one of us can win? Or is this a matter of potentially being able to hopefully go beyond agree to disagree and more along the lines of where are you coming from? Where am I coming from? Let's look at all these aspects and sides to whatever we're discussing here. But people don't really do that. And if you look at a comment page on any major news article, you can see that people don't do that. They don't have the patience for it. So let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming I am persecuted whenever I'm contradicted. Thank you, Ralph Waldo Emerson, for that wisdom today. Because most of the time we're not being persecuted. We're just being disagreed with. So, great quote, which brings us to our next segment, the Lurz World Rankings. So I power rank things I see during the week. I power rank the top 5. I power rank the bottom 5. So I give thumbs up to a certain number of things and give thumbs down to a certain number of things. No algorithm in place here. No AI, just things that I noticed during the week. So we always start with the top 5. So top 5 things. And an easy number 5 on that top 5 list. You could probably tell that how I'm dressed. It's the holiday season. My class appreciates when I'm my last formal day of the year. And we are required to have a tie at my school. I will not be wearing a tie tomorrow, hence the Christmas outfit for the last formal day of the semester. It's Christmas Sweater Vest Day because I love the Christmas season, and I love number 5 on my power rankings list, Christmas cookies. My wife is an outstanding baker, and we baked some Christmas cookies this week, or she baked some Christmas cookies this week and with my daughters. And I ate some Christmas cookies, and so did they, and so did she. There's something about that smell of cookies that just makes me feel in the holiday spirit. So, I am not a skilled baker. I love cooking. I do like to cook up a delicious roast, nice sauce. Made a good pasta sauce this week earlier. Get pasta night. But baking is not my skill set. But my wife is an outstanding baker. So shout out to number 5, Christmas cookies. That makes the list because they are awesome. And it makes me feel happy. And that brings us to number 4 on the list, which is in a similar theme in a cold climate, soup. I never appreciated soup when I was a kid. I never appreciated soup even through my teens and 20s. Soup was the farthest thing from my mind and the farthest thing from my diet. Because you can eat anything you want when you're in your teens and 20s, pretty much. Your metabolism is crazy high. You're not worried about health. But yet all your numbers normally stay pretty solid, even though your diet and alcohol intake not as good in your 20s as it is in your 30s and 40s most of the time, at least if you're me. Diet was not great, and yet the numbers stayed great. The numbers stayed really good. I've been blessed with pretty good health. So I digress. Soup was not on my menu in my teens and 20s. But my goodness, do I appreciate it now. As I said, I love roasts and making a delicious roast. And my wife, in addition to being awesome with making cookies, also creates amazing soups from scratch, usually with whatever the remnants of that roast was. So the turkey, Thanksgiving week, was great. I think I mentioned that I'll talk later about how exactly I enjoy prepping that turkey and brining and getting that roast ready. But the story of this power ranking is soup. And that soup that was made from that turkey. It's one of my favorite things every year. And that's in my wife does an Asian themed soup. It's got mushrooms and water chestnuts and that turkey broth and some of the turkey from the that was left over from the roast itself. So turkey, mushrooms, carrots, celery, and water chestnuts. It hits hard because you got some spice to it too. I think there's even a little coconut milk in there. My goodness. Spicy, it's delicious. And here's the best part. On weeknights in the spring, weeknights next year, all that soup that's left over gets put in the freezer. So on those tough weeknights, when I bring the kids home, trying to figure out what to do for dinner, that soup is waiting. When all other meal plans have gone out, that soup is there. So it's sustainable. It respects the animal that provided the delicious meal for us. Make sure nothing goes to waste. And it's healthy. Soup is incredibly healthy in comparison with a lot of other things that are out there. So soup is a main part of my diet, especially in the fall and winter. And I love it. And it gets a shout out in the power rankings this week. Hits number 4. Number 3, snow tires. As a foolish 20-something and even 30-something, I never put snow tires on my car. That was dangerous. There have been times that I've slipped and slid. There it is, not slided. Where I've slid all over the road because my tires just didn't have the traction to deal with the elements. And I've lived in Chicago and Milwaukee and Roanoke, Virginia, Burlington, Vermont, some pretty snowy places. But out here in Spokane, there's both a lot of snow and ice, along with a lot of elevation changes, and that's the game changer. Chicago is by and large pretty flat. Milwaukee too. Roanoke had the mountains, but not as much of the. They got a lot of snow this week. Should have put snow tires in my car in Roanoke, but because there was just not as much snow, I didn't. But here in Spokane, they're a necessity. And then you feel the difference behind the wheel when those tires grip the road, and you feel that security. And that's, as a parent, you gotta have them. You gotta have the snow tires. So I appreciate them. I appreciate being able to store them in my garage and then putting them on the next season. That's a cost I'm willing to incur because the alternative is a crash. I've had too many close calls over the years, so snow tires. You are number 3 in my power rankings this week. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the grip you provide on these hills and mountains around Spokane. Number 2, debate competitions. There's a lot of political vitriol and a lot of just outright meanness online and in person in these in the public sphere. You can't even. It's very hard to avoid those long threads of just debating, which goes back to that Emerson quote. May I never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming I am persecuted whenever I'm contradicted. If people feel persecuted, they defend themselves, and they defend themselves viciously, going right to dropping rhetorical bombs on their opponent and seeing them as an opponent instead of discourse. Now, speech and debate at schools. I'm the coach of a debate team, and I'm very proud of my debate team because they're doing well within this very regulated and very structured and safe environment for disagreements and learning how to defend themselves and their arguments with evidence and civility rather than vitriol and viciousness. So it's in this world, having that skill set, it's also AI proof. It's AI proof in the fact that when you are live on stage defending an argument with evidence, you need to be able to keep your cool, use the appropriate tone, appropriate nonverbal communication attributes, and deliver a message and vigorously defend a position without sliding into ad hominem attacks or logical fallacies or just plain meanness and vitriol. And that's a skill set that will be in demand wherever they go. So I'm very proud of my debate team members, and I'm very thankful for debate as a competitive event at the high school level and the college level. Love it. I wish I did it in college. I wish I did it in high school. Played a lot of football, did a lot of weightlifting, was in the band, didn't do debate. I should have done debate. So I always give shout outs and support and likes to any posts I see from any of my old schools regarding debate, especially my own, because I'm a head coach of a debate team and very proud of our debate team. And finally, number one on my list is Indiana football. My dad went to Ohio State and is a big Ohio State, and he left this world back in 2019. He's passed away. He was a huge Ohio State Buckeye fan, and even though I remain a Florida Gator, my father's childhood team and my growing up all the way until my own experience in college, when I became a Florida Gator, I became a Florida Gator, even when they played Ohio State. They beat Ohio State, so that was nice. The Gators have not been good for some time. So that prefaces my view that even when the Gators aren't playing and Ohio State is playing, I normally pull for Ohio State because that was my dad's team. They've always got a soft spot in my heart. I remember dancing around when David Boston caught the game-winning touchdown in the 1997 Rose Bowl following the 1996 season. Running around the room, dancing, excited. So I like Ohio State. I like the Buckeyes. And that said, I was rooting for the Buckeyes. It's hard to get mad at Indiana, though, because that's such a good story. It might be one of the best stories that we've seen in college football in this decade, if not more, if not longer. You know, in the history of college football, which goes back to the 1800s, early 1900s, only one other school has more total losses than Indiana. Indiana is the second most losingest program in college football history. A perennial doormat in the Big Ten Conference. Basement dweller. Bottom of those standings. Records like 2-10, 1-11, 3-9. That's the norm for Indiana football. But Curt Cignetti, one of the few people I think he might be one of the only ones who's ever won National Coach of the Year 2 straight years, last year and this year, and he deserves it. He took that program and he turned it around, and they just beat the number 1 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes in the Big Ten Championship. So kudos to Indiana. What a great story. And best of luck to you in the college football playoffs. I hope you do well. It's very hard to turn a program around in the era of NIL. That's name, image, and likeness. Players can now be paid for that. And often chase, just like free agents do in professional sports, they chase the best deals. And it's hard to convince people to come to a place like Indiana. But Curt Cignetti has done it. He's found diamonds in the rough. He's found a lot of outstanding players from lower echelon teams and shown that these players, when put together, can compete at the highest level. It's like Billy Beane and Moneyball with the Oakland Athletics. Curt Cignetti's figured out the answer to the problem and has put together a team that is doing outstanding things. Only undefeated major college football team left in the country, so kudos to Indiana. You are number one in my power rankings this week. Which brings us to the bottom 5. The Lurs World Rankings bottom 5. Number 5. Faraway call centers versus local service. We've been trying to get service on our master bathroom toilet for 2 weeks now. It runs randomly. It's got an issue with the little flapper in the tank. And one of the providers would have calls from Florida. Very difficult to understand the folks on the phone. They're not from here. They're not local here. They're just in a call center just saying that service would be scheduled, and they'll either schedule it on their own without ever contacting me, or they will just ghost me until finally we got some other quotes from local providers who, when you pick up the phone, they're in town and they're there. They're in the office. And then they send someone. It seems like that should be the norm. So if you are outsourcing your calls and you're sacrificing service, yeah, you don't deserve business, and you are in the bottom 5 of my power rankings this week. So those faraway call centers versus local service. Local service reigns supreme. I'll always support that local business that provides it. So good job to local plumbers. You guys are good, and I appreciate you. All right. The FIFA World Cup draw. Man, there was a lot of hoopla surrounding this event this week. It was held in Washington, D.C., and they took forever to draw those nations from a big bowl and put them in their respective World Cup groups. That event was not great. It was not fun. It took them like 40 minutes to even start picking teams. I know you want to draw it out and make it a big event, but that was it took so long. And then they, like, poor Shaquille O'Neal trying to open those, the little canisters that the names of the nations were in. He was having a hard time. His hands were like oven mitts, and these tiny canisters were very tough for him to do it. But he did a great job, at least, pronouncing the names of the country. Wayne Gretzky struggled. He struggled, and I felt bad for him. He's the great one in hockey. Had a hard time reading some names of countries. And then then the village people were on, and it didn't really work out well. Like, they were just, like, the background music was going, but the main chorus wasn't until they finally got it right. And still, they're old, man. That was not the village people who were rocking the house way back in the 70s and 80s. Past their prime. It was a weird event, and it hits the bottom 5 of the power rankings this week. Bottom 5, number 4. That World Cup draw was rough, fairly lame. Number 3, bad coffee at the repair shop. Guys, it's 2025. You're making a boatload of money in that repair shop. I know you are. It's one of the main money makers of a lot of dealerships, is that service department. I am willingly going in there to get some get my snow tires on my car, getting my vehicle serviced. Come on, put some better coffee out there. It's like, in all the places I've lived, that's been consistent. You can go in that repair shop and the coffee's trash. Up your game a little bit. At least get a fridge instead of one of those like things on cruise ships. They have like the cooler, so The bottled water is like 50 or 60 degrees. The coffee's bad. You're stuck there for several hours drinking bad coffee. So number 3 in the bottom 5, bad coffee at the repair shop. Number 2, the playoff committee, the college football playoff committee. Big failure this week. It didn't have to be that way. It was a dud. It was a needless, it was preventable how they did that. Notre Dame was snubbed, and they felt wronged to be snubbed because throughout a majority of the season, despite the fact that they lost head-to-head early in the season against the University of Miami, Notre Dame was ranked ahead of Miami. So Notre Dame's losses were the first 2 of the season to Texas A&M and Miami early, 2 very good teams, and then they ran off 10 straight wins to finish 10-2. Miami lost to, I believe, SMU and Louisville, not as good teams. Later in the year, they picked it up at the end. They did win head-to-head against Notre Dame, but throughout the year, the committee had Notre Dame ranked ahead of Miami. Neither team played this week. And then when it came time for the selection of the teams that made the playoffs, out of nowhere they just switched them back up. Now head-to-head matters. Now Miami's ahead of Notre Dame. Why did they do that? I have a few ideas as to why. One, Duke lost in the ACC championship, or Duke won the ACC championship. Duke has 5 losses. They were not going to make the college football playoff, but they upset Virginia to win the ACC. And that meant that without Miami in the playoff, an ACC team would not have made the college football playoff. So they want to have an ACC team in the playoff out of one of those 12 teams. So that meant Miami had to be in. Well, why is Alabama in with 3 losses? Many college football conferences have lucrative conference championship games. So in order to win the conference, if you're in one of these conferences like the Big 10 or the Big 12 or the SEC or the ACC for that matter, you had to win the conference title game. Now the safest way into the playoffs is to have a very strong strength of schedule and to not be in that conference championship. So teams like Ole Miss and Oklahoma and Miami for that matter, they don't play in the, if you don't play in the conference championship, you could still make the college football playoff. Alabama would have a similar case to Oklahoma or Ole Miss to make the playoffs as a 10-2 team. But they're in a conference championship game. And a team they beat earlier in the season just beat the brakes off them in that conference championship. Alabama had -3 rushing yards. So why is Alabama in and Notre Dame is out? Because that college football playoff committee did not want to send the message that the best thing for your school is to skip that conference championship game. And if Alabama goes in at 10-2, loses the championship game, the conference championship game, and is now 10-3, what incentive is there for a team that's almost assured a playoff spot as long as they don't go to the championship game? If you have teams declining invites to conference championships, much like we see teams declining bowl game invitations now that aren't in the playoffs, that's a bad road to go down if you're the NCAA and you want to see teams go to those, because they make a bunch of money in those things. So for the playoff committee to then make that decision, it was a perfect storm if you're Notre Dame. If Virginia's in, I don't think Miami would have made it. I think they would have kept Notre Dame in and snubbed Miami. And Miami would have howled because the head-to-head matchup favors Miami. And they might be right to howl about that. But I think that they're in because they want the ACC represented. They can't penalize Alabama without setting the precedent of potentially having teams boycott or decline invites to the conference championships, which make a boatload of money. And then Notre Dame's not in a conference. So they're trying to like send a message to Notre Dame saying like, okay, you played a pretty weak schedule after those 2 games, which you lost. Now you're not in a conference championship game. Now you want to get in? Sorry. Because it's easier to snub Notre Dame, which is one team, than it is to set a precedent for teams skipping conference championships. So tough for Notre Dame, but then they responded poorly. They took their ball and went home. They said, we're not going to play in a bowl game because this is an egregious violation. But it's, yeah, you are on number 2 of my playoff committee on my negative bottom 5 power rankings because this all was avoidable. This was avoidable if you just had Miami ahead of Notre Dame from the start. But they're trying to play that fence line, sit that fence, and give themselves leeway. So they had Miami slowly creeping up on Notre Dame because they wanted the freedom to flip them in the end in the event that Duke won the ACC and upset Virginia. And in the event that Georgia beat Alabama. So Alabama's in, even though they should have been excluded. Miami's in over Notre Dame, which is a coin flip. That's just bad for Notre Dame. Then they responded in a way it was also bad because now they're not going to play a bowl game. So the tradition is skipping bowl games and this mess of a playoff committee, yeah, certainly bottom 5 for sure. And I think it could be amended by just doing what they should do to begin with, even though they make a lot of money on those conference championships. It's obvious. They're now outdated. Go back to old school. Go do it the way the NFL does it. Declare the conference champion based on tiebreakers or whatever scenarios you have, and get rid of the conference title games, and expand the playoff to 14 or 16 teams. Expand the playoff, start the week that you would have had all the conference championships, get everyone out of the college football season sometime before mid-January, end the college football season earlier, expand the playoff, you get more teams in, and you also will probably make just as much or more money than you do on what are quickly becoming less important conference title games. That's the way forward in my belief. But right now, after that fiasco of an ugly week, the playoff committee, even the BCS computers, if you remember those days, even that might have been preferable to the to that committee's seemingly random shuffling. If you're cynical and can see and follow the money, it's not so random. You can see why Notre Dame was left out. But if you're following the money and you want more money, just expand get rid of those games anyways. You think you're going to lose money, you'll actually make more by having 14 or 16 teams in instead of 12. And by having those in the present position of what is now occupied by conference title games. If that's the first round of the playoffs, that's going to be a lot more fun. And number 1 on the bottom 5 of my power rankings, the cost of living, inflation, and wage stagnation. We've had multiple administrations try to deal with this. Different governments all over the world, in the United States in particular. It's tough to get by. And that is by far the bottom 5 on the holiday season when everything costs more and working families are struggling and both major political parties and their leaders can't seem to get it done. So that state of affairs and how tough it is to make it, figure it out. They got to figure it out somehow because it's the common people who are suffering. And that's not great. So that is the bottom 5. I mentioned last week that I can buy nice soap because we're doing okay as a family. And it's more expensive to be poorer than it is to be richer. There's an example that I've heard about boots, demonstrating why it's less expensive to be rich than it is to be poor. Because if you're rich, you can afford a good pair of boots that cost $100. Like the example I used was like, if you buy a pair of, like, this is outdated now because $100 will not buy you a good pair of boots anymore. But back when this common example was used in the 20th century, if you can buy a nice pair of boots for $100, you can wear that same pair of boots for 10 years. If you buy a cheap pair of boots for $20, they wear out in 2 to 3 years. Or even 1 year. So if you keep having to buy that cheap pair of boots for $20, eventually you'll spend way more on boots than the person who spends $100 once. And then wears that for 10 or 20 years. Especially if they wear 20 years. That's for sure. If they wear 20 years, then you are certainly going to come up on top, and you will have nice, comfortable feet instead of living in wet shoes and spending more money. That's cheap soap, because you're spending all your money on moisturizers and creams to try to help your dry skin, and you're spending more. Eventually, you're spending more money on all those things combined than you are just buying good soap to begin with. But if you're in a bind where you're living paycheck to paycheck, you have to buy cheap soap, cheap boots, and you spend more money. Because even those cheap things become expensive when the cost of living is high and wages are low. So it's a tough world to live in, and it's the holiday season, and everyone's is pressed right now. And that's bottom 5 of the power rankings. Both Democrats and Republicans have held power in various times, but yet they haven't figured that one out. And it's been bad for some time now. So please figure it out for the people. We're counting on our leaders to do this. So that's my world rankings. And we are pressed for time this week, so we're going to skip ahead to the art, literature, and film portion of this podcast so we can get you out of here within that 45 to 60 minute time frame. Things that I am looking at in this world. One, I'm eagerly awaiting The Evening and the Morning. It's been out for some time. It's by Ken Follett, one of my favorite authors. My offer to you is to advertise on my podcast, but one of my favorite authors is Ken Follett, and The Evening and the Morning is the prequel to Pillars of the Earth. I've read Pillars of the Earth. I've read the sequel to that. What is the sequel to that? The sequel to the Pillars of the Earth. I can't think of the name off the top of my head because, again, this is an unedited podcast. Those two books are some of my favorites. World Without End. I think that's the sequel to Pillars of the Earth. World Without End. Those two are great. Kingsbridge, a fictional town in England, and The Pillars of the Earth is about the building of a cathedral along with all the other political and social workings in medieval England. And The Evening and the Morning is the prequel to Pillars of the Earth, and I'm interested in that period as well. So excited to read that, and excited to give it a shout out on my podcast. I've just started watching The Great on Hulu. It's about the rise of Catherine the Great in Russia, and it's a dramedy in many ways. It has dramatic and comedic elements. It's some good stuff. Another thing, it's been out for a few years. I haven't had the time to watch it. I've started watching it. Thumbs up to The Great. And also Man on the Inside with on Netflix. I really liked The Good Place. And one of the stars of The Good Place is in Man on the Inside. And it's about this dad who gets convinced to go into an assisted living facility and solve a mystery. So it takes a look at something like that demonstrates that comedy and drama and intrigue do not end when you get older. So, especially in the holiday season, a lot of parents and grandparents feel alone in the holiday season. And this kind of looks at the world through their eyes and forces everyone else to do that as well. So I'm trying to be a dutiful son, I'm doing my best to make sure that in these times that my parents and in-laws and older folks in my life are not being ignored. So I love you all. And if you want to see a good series which focuses on older folks, that's a good one. And it seems to be a lot higher entertainment value than The Golden Bachelor or The Golden Bachelorette, which would not make my power rankings or my art and literature and film segment. So, props to Man on the Inside. That brings us to the closing monologue of the week. NIL has gotten a lot of criticism. For a long time, players have been unable to profit from their name, image, and likeness when they're at the collegiate level. It's a new ball game now. And the criticisms of this are coming from folks who have really taken advantage of college athletes while not following the same rules and guidelines. Coaches can jump from school to school, leave their teams in bad situations, as we saw with Lane Kiffin in last week's podcast when I mentioned when he made my bottom 5 of the power rankings when he left Ole Miss right in the middle of the playoff run. Coaches have always been able to do that. Now, individual college athletes can too. And that creates stress for fans and for institutions to try to keep track of all the different moving parts and put together a roster that can compete. We've seen how it's possible. So rather than lament the realities of the system, which now allow the players to have the same freedom that coaches and institutions have in hiring and firing coaches and moving players around, now players have a say in the process as well, and they can move with their feet and leave those places that in search of greater opportunity. It's not the best scenario, especially when you have some student athletes who can leave and do leave 3 or 4 times in the course of a college career, play for 3 or 4 schools, trying to seek that perfect position and that perfect place for them to realize their goals and the team goals at the same time. And it seems selfish, but coaches have been living in that capacity for a long time now. And it's possible to succeed even with all these constraints and freedoms and dealing with this economic reality we're living in. And we see it with Indiana. So the answer is not to shake your fist at the kids, shake your fist at the college athletes who are seeking the best opportunity for themselves. The answer is to find your own Billy Beane, Oakland Athletics, Moneyball model, to find the formula, to find the athletes that no one else is finding, and to give them a chance. So my monologue would say that Curt Cignetti, you're great, and you deserve all the honors you're getting. And we see in the Premier League as well. You'll see in next week's podcast when I talk more about my favorite team. You see Nottingham Forest, that scarf behind me. They're playing in the Europa League today against FC Utrecht. You see Crystal Palace and Aston Villa and Everton don't have the budgets that Liverpool and Man United and Tottenham Hotspur have. They don't have those kind of budgets. They're competing and they're doing well. So the answer is never to just shake your fist at the system. The answer is to find a way to succeed in that system, even if that system is not an equitable one. So it's easy. The easiest way to succeed in NIL is to spend a lot of money, like you see in professional and professional sports as well. Like those teams I mentioned in the Premier League, they spend a lot of money, but there are teams that aren't spending the money, they're doing well. And there are teams in college football, the opportunity is to find and develop talent and build an organization and culture that they can succeed in and feel appreciated with in that organization. So I've seen too much criticism of the kids when the answer is to play Moneyball. Find a formula and make it work. And on that note, I will leave you all for this week. And see you next week. And may all of your Thursdays be a Lurzday Thursday. See you next week.